Hi there, my name is Amber Ayers, and I'm a vocation formation team leader at Fuller Seminary. I'm going to spend some time with you today walking through the different elements so that you can become a fully educated and trained vocation formation group leader in the fully online context.
This presentation will orient you to all of the necessary elements for leading a vocation formation group in the fully online context. The desired outcome of this training is that you would develop the skills necessary to meaningfully engage with students in VF groups in FOL-IS courses. We will be using a lot of acronyms, and so let me begin by explaining what a few of these mean. VF stands for Vocation Formation. FOL stands for Fully Online. This means that students are taking courses completely online, accessing course content and VF content through their laptop or their desktop. And then IS stands for Integrative Studies courses. There are 4 Integrative Studies courses required for all Masters of Theology degrees and Masters of Intercultural Studies degrees. IS 500 is the practices of vocation and formation. IS 501 is the practices of worship. IS 502 is the practices of community. And then IS 503 is the practices of mission. And so as a VF group leader, you will be leading a small group of students in one of these 4 IS courses. This is a big picture of what takes place for students each week as they learn about these formative Christian practices. This is a process that students will actually go through each week as they are introduced to a new practice and then integrate this practice back into their life by going through this process. So beginning at the top, there is the introduction of a formative Christian practice. And then students are academically formed by listening to lectures, readings, watching videos, and in general engaging academically in that practice. From there, students engage in the embodiment of this particular practice. This is where students go out into their community in real time. They utilize their peers and their mentors in order to better understand what this Christian practice looks like in real time in their lives. The intellectual integration of this practice is bringing together the embodied formation and the academic formation of this particular practice. And then the spiritual formation and the integration of this practice is where the VF group content comes into play. So as a VF group leader, you actually come in at the end of the process asking students questions around these practices. You'll be asking things like, how is God leading you to integrate these practices into your life? What have you learned as you invited your peers, your mentors, your neighbors, your small group friends into these practices? And you'll notice that VF groups are a small component of the entire process. They do come in towards the end of the process because students are doing a lot around each of these practices, and yet the VF component is a critical part in asking questions and helping students reflect on what they are learning. So each week you will be able to trace through the process that students are going through as they're introduced to the formative Christian practice. They're academically formed. They embody that formation. They intellectually integrate that into their lives. And then for the VF component, they are spiritually formed and integrate that practice into all of their lives. This is another way of looking at the previous slide. This is actually giving an example or a few different examples of the process that students will go through. So they'll begin with a formative practice. And so, for example, we will take the practice of vocation, the discernment of vocation. Students will be introduced to the idea of vocation. And then they will engage in lectures and readings, perhaps some different videos about what it means to be called by God in a particular vocation. From there, they will engage in the embodied formation of this practice of vocation. There'll be fieldwork assignments, There are embedded disciplines, and that's VFG, standing for Vocation Formation Group Embedded Disciplines. And then the spiritual and academic integration of the practice is where they will be reflecting on what they have learned. Perhaps they'll be writing a reflection paper or a signature assignment. This is really where you as a group leader come into play. Again, guiding, leading, asking questions around all that they have learned as they engage in learning about the practice of vocation. Here's a key concept to keep in mind as you are leading students in the fully online VF group experience. Students remain embedded in their context, meaning we have students that are all the way across the world in countries like Zimbabwe and Malaysia. We also have students who are right in Pasadena taking online courses, and students all across the country. As students engage in the fully online VF group experience, they are asked to embody these course practices and disciplines within their own communities. Again, utilizing their peers, their mentors, perhaps family members and neighbors. So, as a group leader, you're helping students to process and discern where God was present during these exercises, engaging in these different practices, and then how best to integrate these practices back into their life. Here's a quote from John Dewey that rightly applies to the fully online VF experience. We don't learn from our experiences, we learn from reflecting on our experiences. Students will be given the opportunity to reflect on the experiences that they are engaging in, again, utilizing their own context and their own community in order to learn, gain insight, and then integrate these practices back into their life. So the VF group experience is the space where they are given an opportunity to reflect on the experiences that they are having. So as a group leader, here is a key concept for you to keep in mind. In the online context, your role is to encourage students to stay embedded in their context and then to equip students for their context. There's a very unique distinction between an in-person or a residential group leader and an online group leader. We want to be able to draw this distinction to help you understand what your role will be as an online VFGL. So in-person or residential group leaders create experiences by leading spiritual exercises. Ultimately, we might say that in-person group leaders need to be experts. They need to know how to lead spiritual exercises, work with group dynamics, and ultimately bring the content to the group and explain and lead and train students in those spiritual exercises. Compare that to online group leaders who help students process an experience that the students themselves led in their communities. So as a group leader, you don't necessarily need to be an expert, but you do need to be able to listen and ask good questions based on what the student brings in the processing space, where they are engaging in different academic practices and the embodiment of those practices out in their communities. They will be bringing questions, they will be bringing their thoughts, they will be bringing their struggles. And online group leaders need to be able to listen and help them process the experiences that they are going through. Each IS course is a team-led course. There are a number of different people who fill particular roles in order to carry out the purposes of the IS course. So we'll begin by talking about the professor and their role in the IS course. The professor is the primary architect of the course, meaning that they put together the different components of the course and they own and frame the course. You will find that each professor has a different strategy in piecing together the course content and the assignments associated with that and the flow throughout the quarter. They will be able to answer any course-related questions, and ultimately the professor is the person who offers the final grade and grades each assignment. And so as a VF group leader, keep in mind that you will not be responsible for handing out any grades for any of the assignments. You are simply responsible for noting participation from the students in your VF groups. Secondly, the teacher assistant, or the TA. They're ultimately an assistant to the professor. They assist in grading assignments and, again, answer course-related questions. Some professors elect to have a TA while others do not, and so this may or may not be a role that you find you'll be interacting with, another person you'll be interacting with in the IS courses. The VF team leader, or VFTL. I am a VFTL, and as a team leader, I simply oversee and help guide group leaders in particular courses. The VFTL kind of acts as a little bit of a conductor for the VF content, providing the VF content, guiding the group leaders, and answering specifically VF-related questions. So we want to make a distinction between course-related questions and then VF-related questions. There will be an integration of the VF content and the course content, but the team leader will be able to assist you in answering any questions that are specifically related to the VF content, whereas the professor and the TA will answer any questions related to the course. Now, VF group leaders, this is you. As a VFGL, you are the hands-on person who guides students in the VF content. We're going to get more into the specifics of your role and some of the expectations of VFGLs, but to put it simply, in terms of a team-led course, you are the primary person who guides students through the VF content. And then finally, the instructional designer. These are the tech people, and they problem solve Canvas issues that can't be answered in the Canvas help section. You will receive the contact info for your instructional designer at the beginning of the quarter, and these would be the people that you call upon when there's a question, a technical issue with Canvas, or accessing the information online that simply cannot be solved by going to the help section in Canvas. So to get into some of the specifics, the qualities of a fully online vocation formation group leader. First, we're really looking for you to have a pastoral presence with students. Whether it be in the online written discussions, during some of the face-to-face meetings online that you have, we desire that you would cultivate empathy, curiosity, compassion, and understanding, that you would truly be a pastor in the online context as you're engaging and interacting with your group members. Also, the coaching ability. A coach is a very crafty question asker. And so we would desire that you would ask more questions than give answers. And in the process, you would be exercising self-awareness as you are interacting with students, aware of your own biases, perhaps aware of your own background, as you engage in these different experiences and practices. You yourself will have background and experience to contribute. It will be important for you to weigh in and identify what baggage you may already be bringing, what perspective, what bias you may already have, and find ways of opening up the space so that students are able to process what they are experiencing. These are just some traits of a really good coach. And then finally, an online presence. This simply means that you would have easily accessible high-speed internet. You would have the video conferencing abilities in order to engage face-to-face with your students, and then a rhythm of life for accessing online courses regularly. We would invite you to consider a schedule, a quarterly schedule, where you actually set aside time to do your work in the online context, whether that means setting calendar reminders, notifications, where you have an hour or two each week to engage with your students and schedule that time specifically for your work as a VFGL. we want to introduce the idea of the many voices in our lives. The reality is that we have a lot of different voices, a lot of different people contributing to our thoughts and our learning. And when you think about it, these students have professors who are speaking content to them. They're reading books, they're watching videos, they have friends, they have family, they have peers, they have mentors. Social media is influencing. These are the many voices of our lives that are speaking things to us. So as a vocation formation group leader, we invite you to offer your own voice to help students discern God's voice in the midst of so many voices. It takes a level of discernment to filter through the many voices that students are hearing. And the VF groups also provide a space where students can practice listening to God's voice for one another. It would be easy to see how God's voice could be drowned out if there are so many voices speaking to us. Students need a space where they can seek clarity and perhaps be given the gift of other group members and a leader like yourself to help them discern more clearly what it is that God is speaking amidst the many voices.
At this point, I would like to transition from talking about the vocation formation vision to some of the day-to-day, week-to-week, quarterly rhythms that you will be participating in as a vocation formation group leader. So we're going to go from 30,000 feet down to the ground, and I'll give you some examples and some templates, and we'll talk specifically about the day-to-day activities that you'll be engaging in.
Now, to begin, every course varies, and it's very much dependent upon the professor's design of the course and how he or she is designing and implementing the course content. But what you can expect is that there will be a combination of 3 different forms or VF assignments: synchronous meetings, asynchronous gatherings, and dyad conversations. First, the synchronous meetings are live video meetings that are conducted on Canvas conferences. Okay, so this is where your full vocation formation group will identify and set a particular time slot, typically an hour to an hour and a half, where you will meet via video conferencing on Canvas conferences and have a small group session, and that is what's called synchronous meeting. Now, an asynchronous meeting is where students can get on at any time of their choosing and engage in a written discussion on Canvas, where they perhaps will have an initial post responding to the assignment questions, and then a few days later they'll be able to get on again and respond to what their fellow students or group members also posted. So they're asynchronously engaging with one another via written discussion on Canvas. Finally, the dyad conversation is where 2 students discuss an assignment on the phone or on the video conferencing tool, Canvas conferences, or in person if they are in the same city or same vicinity. The idea with a dyad conversation is that it creates a little more of an intimate setting where students can get to know other students in their groups and provides space, again, to discern and filter through the many voices that they are hearing from throughout the quarter. So you can expect to see a combination of synchronous, asynchronous, and dyad conversation assignments throughout the quarter. This is what we are calling a VF group schedule for each of your courses. This is like a roadmap for the entire course throughout the quarter, the 10-week quarter. Every online course will have a spreadsheet like this, and we really encourage you to make this your first stop if you have questions about any assignments or due dates. If you're not exactly sure where to find a discussion topic on Canvas, this would be the place that you would go to before maybe contacting your team leader or the professor to have that question answered. So I'm going to walk through each of these components just to give you a sense of how the course is structured and what the 10 weeks will feel like in the rhythm. So you'll notice during week 1 Because it is the drop add week, there are no vocation formation activities. Things really kick off during week 2, where students will upload an introductory video, and this is where they will introduce themselves to the VF group, and there'll be a written discussion around the videos. You'll notice that the due dates for the initial post, meaning students need to first upload their video by June 28th, and then they need to come back around, circle back around by July 1st and comment on the initial posts. This is an asynchronous assignment because students will upload the video on their own time and then have the opportunity to respond back to their fellow students, again on their own time, but within a certain window or the time frame. And then if you're ever confused about where to find the assignment on Canvas, you can always go over here and click directly on this link, and it will take you to that assignment and that written discussion. During week 3 is when the synchronous group meetings kicked off for this particular course. And you'll notice that the due date for this is more of a time frame than it is an actual date. The reason for that is because the synchronous group meetings are set on the schedule based on the availability of the group members and the vocation formation group leader. And so there are different ways of scheduling the synchronous group meeting, and ultimately they all need to take place during this week 3, July 3rd through the 15th. Then during week 4, we're back to an asynchronous written discussion, where the initial post is due July 12th and comments are due on July 15th. Now, let me pause and just say that as the group leader, we're going to really encourage you, particularly during the asynchronous assignments, to hop on and engage with students the day after the initial post is due and the day after when the comments are due. This is kind of the crucial window to set the tone for your group. And students experience groups as particularly cold or standoffish if they make a post and there's a significant lag time in commenting or circling back around to engage with others online. So as the group leader, we really want to encourage you to set the tone and make these time frames part of your set-aside work with Fuller. And again, whether that means you set notifications in your phone or schedule time specifically around these days, these are, especially during the asynchronous meetings or the asynchronous assignments, these are the crucial windows to pay attention to. This is another VF group schedule for the IS 503 or Practices of Missions course with David Musa. This was also in the summer of 2017. And with this screenshot, I'd like to point out another modality that's employed in the VF component, specifically the dyad conversations. You'll see that this class, they also did an introductory video, this time during week 1. During week 2 is when their synchronous group meeting took place, but then during week 3 is when the dyad conversations took place. Now again, the dyad conversations are where 2 students discuss an assignment. Typically it's a set of questions related to the practice for that week, and so this week they discuss the practice of mercy. So 2 students identify a time to get on the phone, get on Canvas conferences, or meet in person if they are in close proximity, and go through the reflection questions, helping again to integrate the ideas and the learnings from the practice of mercy during week 3. Now, one thing I want to point out is you'll notice that there's not a specific due date for these dyad conversations, and this is because students are needing to complete the assignment based off of their own availability. And so the due date is actually the end of week 3. They have an entire week to complete the dyad conversation. If you remember back to the previous screen in Susan Maros's course, for the asynchronous assignments, students needed to complete the assignment by a particular date. These are more time frames because the dyad conversations take place based off of student availability. This document is the VF group and dyad meeting assignment document. This was also for David Musa's course in the summer of 2017, the IS 503 course. What do we want to point out here is this is a document that's specific to the students in the course and the group leaders for the course. You'll notice that there are 5 groups and the students have been distributed amongst those 5 groups. These are hyperlinks, and so if you ever want to get in touch with a student, you can actually go here and click on the hyperlink. It takes you to their profile on Canvas. So at the beginning of the quarter, students are distributed evenly amongst these groups, and then they are assigned to dyad assignments or dyad meeting assignments. So down here along the bottom, the first tab is the VF group assignments, and then you'll notice that the next tab is the group 1 meeting schedule, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5. So I want to point out and highlight the dyad assignments for the VF group number 2. This is a group led by Ali Kern. It's important to read this document from left to right, and so you'll notice that during week 2, the first kind of VF assignment is the full synchronous group meeting. That will take place on Canvas video conferencing, and they have the meeting date and time. During week 3 is when the dyad conversations began. You'll notice here, and they're color coordinated in order to make it easier to understand who is meeting with who. Keith Carlson and Kylia Clark got together, and because the number of students in this particular group was 6, in order for the group leader to have a touch point with those students, we added a 3rd group member section, and Ali, as the group leader, was able to connect with these students for that particular week. So Keith and Kylia and Ali met on Skype, and the date that they completed this was July 7th. And they simply came into this document. They were able to access this document and noted after they completed the meeting, the date that it was completed and the kind of meeting method on Skype video conferencing. Simultaneously during week 3, Erica Henry met with Jessica Markwood and Kay Nam met with Christopher Sands. Again, you can see that because the accountability really rests on the students, to complete these dyad meetings. They were able to note the meeting date and method and whether they completed the meeting and the date, and specifically over here they noted the time that those were completed. So this just gives you an overview of the assignment to have the dyad conversation. Now, as this training video is being recorded, we actually are in the middle of week 10. And so you'll notice that right now, these meeting date and method cells are not filled out, nor have they noted that they've been completed because they are currently having these dyad conversations. Now we'd like to continue talking about the VFGL quarterly rhythm. Specifically, we'd like to talk about how you will be interacting with your students on a regular basis and how you'll be reporting to the professor and the other group leaders in the course. We'd like you to maintain regular contact with your vocation formation group by sending a weekly email or a video or an audio clip, giving them a heads up about the week ahead. And what this will look like is every week you should receive a weekly check-in from your vocation formation team leader. Typically this will come at the end of the week, and that email or that prompt will contain a looking forwards and a looking backwards. It's a way of staying on track with how the quarter is progressing. So your team leader will give you a sense of what the students are engaging in that current week. And they will also give you a sense of what is up ahead and how students can be preparing for the next week's VF assignment. So we'd like you to use those prompts, and if it's in an email format, you can simply copy, cut, and paste into another email for your students and then send that to them as a way that they can look ahead. But we also encourage some creativity in this area. If you would like to create another touch point between your students, Go ahead and record a video of yourself where they can see your face, they can hear your voice, and perhaps bridge the divide that exists in the online context. And then we'd like you to submit feedback on the VFGL and Professor Communication Forum. And this is simply reporting about who completed the assignment, what students were absent, what worked well, what was challenging, and if there's anything that the other group leaders and the team leader can be praying about, anything that the professor can be praying about. This forum is really dedicated to keeping the communication lines open between all of the team members as they make the course happen and interact with students. We would like you to do this immediately after each VF component. So for example, after you have your synchronous meeting, it would be helpful to get online and write a response in the VFGL and Professor Communication Forum about who showed up for the synchronous meeting, what components of the outline worked well, what was challenging, what are things that students are wrestling with, maybe some questions, or if there are themes that the students are talking about, go ahead and report that in the forum as well. Going back to the VF group schedule, this again is the roadmap for each of the IS courses. If you're wondering where to find the VFGL and Professor Communication Forum, you can always come back to this spreadsheet, and you'll notice down here at the bottom, it's highlighted the exact link to go to whenever you need to provide feedback about that week's practice or that week's assignment. Additionally, the VF Group Dyad meeting assignment, that link can be found here as well. This is where students are assigned to their Dyad conversations. In terms of time commitment, we'd like to give you a sense of how much time you will be spending as you work with your students throughout the quarter. If you're committed to working with one group of students, you can expect to spend approximately 1.5 to 2.5 hours for each vocation formation activity per week. If you're leading 2 groups, that bumps up to 2.5 to 3.5 hours per week. And if you're leading 3 groups, that moves to 3.5 to 4.5 hours per week. Now again, this is an approximation, but we do want to set the expectation that there is a limited amount of time that you will be working with your students in completing the vocation formation activities. This includes responding to student posts in asynchronous assignments. It includes the synchronous meetings. It includes emailing and, in general, problem solving. And there will be some variation based off of the vocation formation activity for each week, but try to stay within these time parameters as you are working with your students each week. Now, we have even had some vocation formation group leaders who have set aside a special workstation where they know that when they sit down, they will conduct their fuller work, and they are able to set a timer just to have a sense of how much time they are spending on their work with the students in the online context. So we encourage you to make that work for you in whatever way works best in your life. This is another template that you will be provided by your team leader at the beginning of every quarter. This is what's called the VF Group Participation Template. This example is from the IS 502 course with Patrick Odin in the summer of 2017. The purpose of this spreadsheet is that you would be able to track the participation and particular notes that you want to keep track of throughout the quarter on each of your students. So you notice that this particular group leader was able to jot down some notes related to each of the vocation formation activities throughout the quarter. The very first vocation formation activity was the intro video. And this group leader jotted down some particular notes and things that he wanted to remember in order to track with these students throughout the quarter. For the synchronous meeting, the next vocation formation activity, he was also able to get some specifics and perhaps even some nuances about each of these students. So this will be a helpful tool as you are keeping track of all of your students, making some notes, and finding some themes throughout the quarter related to your students and what God is doing in their lives.
We have learned a lot over the many quarters that the vocation formation emphasis has been incorporated into the IS courses. So now I'd like to give you some tips and suggestions on how to have a successful vocation formation group.
First, we'd like to give you some tips and suggestions on how to have a technologically smooth synchronous meeting. We really want to encourage you to talk to your students about how to prepare for the synchronous meeting that will likely take place in the first 1 or 2 weeks of the quarter and also take place towards the end of the quarter. Would you encourage students to prepare in the following ways? Use a laptop or a desktop. Unfortunately, Canvas Conferences does not work on cell phones or tablets, and so they will need to be in a stationary place on a laptop or a desktop. The browsers that are compatible with Canvas Conferences are Safari and Firefox, but at this point in time, Chrome is not compatible with Canvas Conferences. So encourage them, if they do not already have it, to download Safari or Firefox and use that browser when they log on to Canvas Conferences. Additionally, we encourage all members who are joining the synchronous meeting to restart their computer before getting on the conference. Oftentimes, if something like Skype or Zoom or another web application that has been using the webcam previously, that will often interfere with webcam accessibility. So restarting your computer in some ways restarts the webcam and allows Canvas Conferences to access that webcam. And then, of course, we encourage everyone to get on the conference about 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time and test their audio and video capabilities. And this simply allows for a little preparatory time and test time so that we're not dealing with the technological issues while attempting to lead the vocation formation activity. And then finally, we just encourage everyone to locate themselves in a place with strong Wi-Fi and do not move for the duration of the conference. So places like a home, an office where there is a large bandwidth and strong Wi-Fi are great places to have a Canvas conference. Places like a coffee shop are, in general, not good places to have a Canvas conference simply because there are a number of users that access the Wi-Fi and take up the bandwidth. Here are some online communication skills to develop as a vocation formation group leader. There's a concept about connecting and not projecting when you're interacting with your students. It's a very common and human tendency to listen to stories, connect the other person's experience to our own experience. This is a way of cultivating empathy and growing closer to the person that we are listening to, which is a good thing. But oftentimes what we do is we project our own experience back onto another person's experience. And when we do that, we take their unique experience from them. So our encouragement is that you would connect with your students, but refrain from projecting your own background, bias, and your own experience onto their experience. Give them the space and the freedom to share what it is that God might be doing, what they are learning, how they are growing and being shaped. Here's another tip that you can employ as you are asking questions related to the asynchronous assignments for your students. It'll be important for you to ask concrete questions that are focused on the students' written posts. Things like who, what, when, where, and how questions, but why questions do not communicate well in the online context. They can often feel threatening in the online context, and so instead we encourage you to ask questions like, what was your intent in ... So keep in mind as you are developing questions and engaging with your students in written discussions, keep in mind these who, what, when, where, and how questions. If you're wondering where to begin as you are engaging with your students in the written discussions or the asynchronous assignments, here are some potential questions and sentence starters that you can use. Things like, how does that play out in your life? Or what would it look like if you ... You might use the first person and say, I'm curious, or I wonder about. Tell me more about, or I sense that you are ... And then a way of connecting with your students would be saying something like, when you said, fill in the blank, it really resonated with me, and explain why it resonated with you. And then a way of connecting student to student would be saying something like, student A responded to your post in this way, and I agree or disagree with her. And then maybe pose the question, what do you think? So here are just some helpful questions that you might use as you are interacting with your students in the asynchronous assignment. I want to encourage you to provide a content-filled post in response to students' vocation formation submissions for the asynchronous assignments. What defines a content-filled post are these elements. We'd like you to notice something specific about the post, a specific thought or a word or a concept that the student highlighted. And then would you offer words of encouragement, gratitude, celebration, hope, or peace? Again, remember that you are the pastoral presence for these students in this course. And so encourage them as they are opening up, as they are reflecting, as they're perhaps being vulnerable and engaging in this assignment. And then going back to those who, what, when, where, and how questions, those will be very helpful as you draw the student out and allow them to think more deeply about the practice that they are engaging in. But refrain from those why questions in order to take the conversation deeper and not build a barrier between you and the student in the online context. Here are some suggestions on how to respond to challenges that you may face as a vocation formation group leader. Oftentimes students post late and there are life circumstances that prevent them from fully engaging in the written discussions, the asynchronous assignments. We will ask that you communicate that late participation to the professor, and it's the professor's responsibility to also reach out to the student and inquire about their late posting. If the student is in a crisis, we'd like you to set up a phone call to discuss their situation. And because you are the pastoral presence for this student, make it a pastoral call and not necessarily a delinquency call. Inquire about the things that are going on in their lives and see if there's any way that you can help them or address their needs. If anything, simply praying for them speaks volumes to these students. It is your responsibility to communicate participation to the professor, but again, it is not your responsibility to give out grades related to the participation of each student. There will likely be some assignments and some students who do not give the appropriate amount of time to the practice or the exercise. And so a way of responding to this challenge would be to probe deeper with the who, what, when, where, and how questions, and refer back to the potential questions and sentence starters from the previous slides. And then finally, if you come across a challenge where students are responding inappropriately to one another's posts, it would be helpful to refer back to the vocation formation group commitment that you made during the first synchronous meeting with your group at the beginning of the quarter. It's helpful to refer back to the agreements that you made and say something like, we agreed as a group to be respectful of one another's points of view. And then, of course, respond in the forum or the written discussion as the Spirit leads you. If necessary, go ahead and set up a phone call, and again, make it a pastoral phone call to work through the situation between the students.
Congratulations, you have completed the Vocation Formation Group Leader Training for the online context. If you have any lingering questions, we encourage you to contact your team leader as they will be able to guide you through the Vocation Formation Group Leading experience. Thanks again, many blessings.